What happened in the sprint and qualifying for the
Brazilian Grand Prix?
Right, let's get into it, shall we? Although it's going to be a slightly shorter podcast than we expected because of qualifying, of course, being postponed, which we were waiting for. But thankfully, the sprint was so good. Watching 4 cars in 3 different teams separated by absolutely nothing, just flat out going for the win. I thought I was dreaming. This is the thing we've been dreaming for so long, right?
I thought it was, as the sprint goes as well, Tommy, because we've had some stinky sprints, haven't we, over the years? But that was a good one, definitely. And the Interlagos is always a vibe.
Let's get into the first question from P1 patron Alan Endope. Why didn't McLaren swap sooner rather than later? Yes, I mean, my opinion, they were absolutely playing with fire there. I can't believe they didn't do it sooner. I understand why they didn't do it straight away on the first lap. Of course, when Charles and Max were right behind Lando, there's no way Oscar's ever going to let him through because he could easily lose a bunch of places. But the second that gap opened up, I cannot believe they didn't switch him immediately, because you're playing with fire there that you don't know if there's going to be a red flag, a safety car. I mean, there was, we'll get into that later, but the embarrassment for McLaren if it had gone to a red flag or they hadn't had time to switch them. Why they didn't do it sooner for me was a big surprise.
The only way I can understand why McLaren wouldn't just do something like that, which is pretty simple, and look, Oscar's got nothing to fight for now in the championship, he's mathematically possible, but it's not going to happen, is this sense of, I don't know if it's ego or this attachment to the McLaren way. This whole like, oh, we won't prioritise one driver. And then it's like, okay, we will prioritise, but we'll just leave it really late so Oscar can feel like he's won, because we don't want to... Like, McLaren, stop faffing about. Either do team orders and be clear and concise, because every time Oscar's been given a clear, concise instruction, he's followed through. He's given that team no reason to believe. It's because they're faffing about, like what happened in Monza, because they weren't clear. They were just like, oh, papaya rules? Shut up. Like, oh my God. Just either do it, or I'd respect it more, Tommy, if they were just like, no team orders. Lando has to fight for every position, including with Oscar. Pick a lane. Don't try and like do this middle ground where you're like trying to, because they just make themselves look like they're not ready to fight for a title, as far as I'm concerned. It's embarrassing, to be honest.
This question from Jopo Blog. Should team orders be banned from the sport? No. They tried to do this before, after what happened in Austria 2002 with Michael Schumacher. They were like, no, you can't do team orders anymore. And all that happened was we got ridiculous coded messages because the teams still want to do it. The teams and the drivers are never going to... The sport is far too complex. It's like when they tried to ban driver communication with their engineers and they weren't allowed to tell them which buttons to press on the steering wheel. The sport's too complicated now. It's too far down the line to have this dream of kind of just shut the engineers down. They can't talk to them because they literally can't drive the cars anymore without the engineers. So to ban team orders from the sport is, in theory, we all want to see racing, but this is what happened before where we had Fernando's faster than you. Like, it just got a bit silly.
There's no point trying to enforce a rule that is unenforceable, because you can't stop teams having conversations behind closed doors and deciding on things beforehand. So, yeah, I mean, I get the premise, but you're right, Tommy, unless you have 20 constructors with one car each, you're not going to get team orders.
P1 patron Ronak. Oscar was clearly the faster driver today and wasn't happy about swapping around with Lando. Does this have the makings of a Hamilton-Rosberg type rivalry down the line, maybe even in 2025? This is the beauty of the sport. There's good and bad sides to having 2 very quick drivers. Oscar was faster. Was he not happy? I wouldn't say he wasn't happy. I think that's unfair. He always knew what he was going to do. But I do think he drove in a way where maybe this is unfair to him, but his move at the start, the way he covered Lando off, then waited for a long time. Maybe it was the fact that McLaren weren't telling him and saying it's safer to do it yet. To me, that spells Oscar, basically. I think Oscar was driving in a way that he could have basically been in the lead for as long as possible, and then if Lando did get overtaken at the start or overtaken later by Charles Leclerc or Verstappen, he could be like, oh, well, we can't swap now, can we? That's how I sort of saw that potentially happening.
This was always the challenge. If McLaren were going to, drop Daniel Ricciardo, where there was a clear 1-2 with Lando and Daniel, to go for 2 number ones, which again, the McLaren way, they love having 2 number ones. Senna and Prost back in the day, prime example. You're inviting this problem, and then you've got to deal with it, McLaren. Like, this is a problem it's a good problem to have in some ways, but also if you're fighting in a competitive constructors fight where there's going to be at least 3 cars capable of winning races next year, if Mercedes butt their ideas up maybe 4, it's not going to be easy for them.
Right, let's get into the big question. This is from Mike Boos. Was the VSC all part of the Papaya master plan or just a lucky coincidence? What I would say is it is very convenient for McLaren, but there have been examples of it in the past. I think Formula One in general have been extremely slow with the VSC. We literally saw it with the Carlos and Sergio crash in Baku. I remember, I think it was China, you had that shot of Bottas getting out his car. When cars were coming up and they immediately, it's almost like they see it on the screen themselves and panic and press the button and go, oh, that does look a bit dangerous actually. And that happens a lot. So whether it is just coincidental, it's very easy to jump on a conspiracy, but I do think they've just delayed it.
Yeah, there's clearly, I don't know if it's a lack of faith that is understandable from the fan base and even the drivers, right, to how promptly these, because the idea of a VSC is to neutralise the race and, make things safe at the end of the day. And, the weather's dry and there's, it's a slow part of the track. I get that. I think that it was too delayed for what a VSC should be able to do, because, it just takes Oscar to get a bit too, happy on his throttle, and Nico's right there with his car. These things can happen. And you know what, Tommy? I wish the VSC had come out earlier, not just from a safety point of view, but then it would have taught McLaren a lesson. Because them faffing about, they got lucky, really. They did get lucky, right? This VSC didn't keep Oscar ahead of Lando. And it's almost like they need to learn this lesson to actually be like, right, we're not going to, again, start faffing about trying to do it in the McLaren way. You do it or you don't. And, I get why. Also, like, Lando's kind of annoyed. He's not, you'd think they've discussed every single potential
He even
eventuality.
kind of alluded to the fact that I thought we were going to... So he had people have been saying that he's been moaning on the radio and all this kind of begging for it, but I think he had every right to kind of question the decision, because it very much sounded like they'd had this discussion in a driver meeting or whatever, and you're going to get the place back. Matt always brings up this point that in Hungary, they said, oh, you're going to need Oscar for the championship. And then, he's driving around the outside of him at Monza. So I'd love to sit here as a Max Verstappen fan and basically be like, yes, they have rigged the safety car to basically favour McLaren, and McLaren are controlling it. But it's just not the case. I think just coincidences sometimes do happen. Right, now for the next contentious and controversial moment. Q1 patron Sir Brienne. Is the 5-second penalty for Max warranted in your opinion? Yes. I think a lot of people, from my understanding, is that they are misunderstanding what this penalty is actually being given for. Because after the initial moment, I watched it and thought, oh, that's a bit weird that Max is kind of going alongside. The safety car's not ended. But that's not what he got a penalty for. He got a penalty because he was under the delta time. And if he'd been given a penalty for basically pulling alongside Oscar Piastri, and then they've kind of... Because basically the talk was that you're not allowed to drive alongside during a safety car, which we know because Max Verstappen used to do that, and they've put in that rule because of Max. But there's no rule about it happening in a virtual safety car. So I think a lot of people think that that's what Max got the penalty for, and they've used it as an excuse to give him a penalty. But that's not... And if they had done that, I'd probably be here saying, yes, they're trying to keep the title close by giving him a penalty, and it's their chance to do it. However, it's a slam dunk penalty because rules are rules, and there's a minimum delta time for a reason, and that's what he kind of breached.
If you watch the highlights back, you see when the VSC comes out, Max is about 7.5 tenths, I want to say, about 3/4 of a second behind Oscar. And you look at Oscar relative to Lando, and then you look at when the VSC goes out, Max is right on Oscar's gearbox. So obviously Max is, it's 0.63 of a second is a lot of time in Formula One. So Max has made a calculated decision to try and get that kind of momentum going in. And because the drivers don't know exactly when the VSC is going to end. They know when it's about to end, but then there's kind of a range for when it actually ends. And Max has, I think, completely understandably just tried to carry momentum into there, and it's not worked out. And it's one of them that it's hard and fast, it's measurable. It's like any sport in regulation. Go too fast in the pit lane, even if you're a fraction over, it's a penalty.
Okay, on to qualifying now. I say on to qualifying. Nothing happened in qualifying. Delayed due to, of course, huge rainstorm. Gem 0275. What is the point of the full wet tyres if they're not going to use them? Also, the fans deserve a full refund for this. This is BS. I mean, it's very easy to sort of jump on they should be on wet tyres, but I don't think the helicopter could even fly because the conditions were so bad, which it needs to happen. It was very dark. The conditions were awful. It wasn't like, don't get me wrong, when there's a sprinkling of rain, and we've seen it more often than not, it is very frustrating when they don't go out and have running. And I do feel desperately sorry for the fans, particularly, you've heard people have taken 30-hour coach trips from Argentina to be here, and they're not going to get to watch any of the running. It's absolutely gutting. But they can't do anything about the weather, and the fact is it was absolutely abysmal weather. I don't think they were ever going to run in it. Look,
these kind of conditions, you have a bad accident and the emergency services can't be there. The sport has a duty of care to the drivers and to upholding the kind of safety standards they have. Yeah, of course, it's really annoying. And you do sometimes look at these tracks and think, could there be more investment in these tracks like Interlagos and Suzuka that are typically curtailed and often curtailed by weather? But outside of that, there's not too much you can do. Like if it is just coming down like crazy, like you can't be sending the cars out. It's not even so much the wet tires might be able to handle the grip, but they can still aquaplane. The water kicked up out the back is well talked about and well known. It's a shame, but it's one of them things that I don't know, apart from better facilities at the track to displace the water, would that have even helped today? I'm not so sure.
So this is a very interesting question, which is what happens if they can't qualify tomorrow? And I've just seen a tweet from John Noble that says, looking at the sporting regulations, the nearest guide to how the Brazilian grid will be formed if qualifying cannot take place is as follows. Drivers who are unclassified because of conditions will be allocated the top positions in accordance with the order they were classified in P3, or in the case of a sprint session, P1. So that is the first practice session. And if that happens, let's cast our mind back to the order of free practice 1, which was Lando Norris first, George Russell second, Ollie Behrman third.
British.
That's British bias, that is, right there.
But that's not even the best bit, is it, Tom?
No, it's not, because Max Verstappen was 15th, and he also has a penalty, so he will be behind Zhou Guan Yu, of course, was 20th. If you were Zach Brown, you'd be getting helicopters flying over the track, pouring water on the circuit tomorrow morning, wouldn't you? Because that is the dream scenario for McLaren, because they would have, Lando in P1, Max last. Max with a fresh engine, would we see? a repeat of a repeat of 2021.
There is no way you can justify that when it's not absolutely stipulated within the regulations, which it isn't. So I think, that's fun to consider, but surely, I mean, it's either you take the sprint quali or the sprint race result.
They're
surely
so much more representative, aren't they? When they're,
of course,
yeah. If they went on the FP1 result, I think Johnny Herbert would be banned from ever entering the Netherlands ever again, because what a scenario that would be. Of course, you'd think that they'd be able to run tomorrow. I mean, what is the weather? The weather looks bad tomorrow as well. So.
It looks not so bad in the morning. I had a look earlier, but yeah, if we can get an AM quali session, that'd be nice.
Yeah. So yeah, going to be very interesting to see what they do on that situation. And that is it. Tommo, thank you very much for going through the sprint, all the controversy. You've picked a good one to join us. Give us your final thoughts, seeing as though Matt always does it to me.
Final thoughts. I think that, look, it's still going to take a Herculean effort from McLaren and Lando to get. I think Max won the championship in Singapore. For me, that was the race that really did it. But Max has good race pace, so I expect him to see him, pushing through the field, especially in the rain as well.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to quali tomorrow, which hopefully does happen. If not, we might see Max fighting through from 20th, which would be equally as exciting and controversial. And we'll see you tomorrow. Matt will be back on Twitch. Not sure, haven't discussed yet whether we'll be doing a live stream, maybe for quali, if it happens. So join us then. But if not, join us for the race and our usual stuff. Tommo, thanks again for joining, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.